Our first Bible reading was taken from Isaiah 50, verse 1 to 9, the second one being Mark chapter 8, verse 27 to 30. When we look at the two readings, there are people that are talking to each other. That's the common about them. But they all want to sort of like trying to identify something, whether they know it or they don't know it, but the conversation is about trying to identify something. The heading of my sermon is taken from Mark, and it says, "But who do you say I am?" That is from Mark. Now, I'm just trying to understand also something here to say, when does someone come to you and say, "What do you say I am?" Or "Who am I to you?" We've heard those questions, eh? That's another issue that I'm battling with, but we'll deal with it as we talk about it. When we look at Isaiah, there is talk of a divorce. And we all know that under normal circumstances that we know, especially like us in Africa, where there is a divorce, there is no peace. In other countries, people just come together and say, look, can we not divorce? And that's it. It's fine with them. But as much as it may not be that tough as it appears to be, but when you look at the reasons that may have caused that divorce, all is not well. That's a reality. So where there is divorce, there is no peace. All is not well. But when we look at this and try to understand, to say, which divorce is Isaiah trying to talk about? In the reality, there was no divorce that was taking place, despite that there is the question of divorce and the divorce certificate being given. But the word is telling us that there are people who had drifted away from God. So once you move away, which means you have created some sort of separation. But in reality, we are not talking separation in terms of marriage. So we are talking about people who have drifted away from God. In the same chapter, God goes on to question that when he needed somebody, there was nobody. And he's also asking us to say, don't you believe that I have the power to help whatever situation you may be? But we also hear of somebody who is saying, I'm not disobedient. So already within the 9 chapters, you find that within the 9 verses, it's like we already have 3 stories in them. But at the end of it, like I've said already, there is need to be able to identify someone. That is the whole question that is in there. In that conversation of being not disobedient, we hear someone saying or trying to say the same words that we find in Mark 11, verse 28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in a hut, and then you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy. This is where it's leading us to. There is a conversation, but that conversation is leading us to try and identify someone. And when we identify that someone, what are we going to do with that someone? Within the same verses 4 to 9, we also hear an acknowledgement that somebody is awakening me every morning. It's something that we take for granted, isn't it? Waking up in the morning is supposed to be usual. I had a discussion with a colleague the other time. He was not feeling well because of COVID, so he was in hospital. He was in for almost 21 days. And then when he came out, it took him another 14 plus days, he recovered. So when most of the time we're talking to him through the wife. So when he managed to be able to be himself, he called me, trying to find how work was doing and so forth, and then explaining to me what he went through. What I remember vividly from him, he said to me, Mr. Milijala, you know when you are in that ICU or you are in the ward, and when you hear in the morning, the nurses come and say, wakey, wakey, first you pierce yourself to say, am I still there? Am I hearing someone? He says, this thing is not a joke. He says you are given these tablets to stop the pains and you sleep flat. You don't hear anything. But come that moment when those tablets are over in your blood, you have to jump out of the bed to say, is it me? Why am I still awake? So I'm saying, here is someone who is acknowledging that there is someone who makes me wake up every morning. But it's something that we take for granted, most of us. We jump out of the bed, I'm late for work, I come start the car, we go to work. But just to take that moment and say, but who enabled me to jump out of this bed? Remember I said, the whole thing is to identify who is this person with all this enabling power. So we need to be at a stage where we say, we know this person who is doing all this to us. And then he's also saying, I'm not rebellious. And I've never been rebellious. Nor did I turn away. I gave my back to those who struck me, and my cheek to those who plucked out the beard. I did not hide my face from shame and spitting. These words are familiar, isn't it? This is Isaiah 50. But when you go to the New Testament, the words are very familiar. So the idea is we want to identify who is the owner of these words. We also find, like in John chapter 5, verse 19, when Jesus said, truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing. Because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. So now we are meeting at this point where someone is acknowledging that there is someone who is also enabling me, but they are one. And remember we said, our question is, but so who do you say I am? There is a conversation, but no one is identifying himself and saying, this is who I am. If as Mark records it, Jesus is asking his disciples this question. I may also ask, or tempted to ask, to say, but he wants the disciples to know who he is. Is it that he says they don't know? Or he's saying himself does not know who he is? We don't know. And also, such a question is a bit broad. You don't know what the person's intentions are. Who do you think I am? If you have no context to it, it becomes a challenge. You may think you are answering something, and then you get trapped in it, because you've already answered. The same question has been recorded in different ways, particularly in Matthew chapter 16, verse 13, and also Luke chapter 9, verse 28 to 20. However, in all the three records, Jesus had asked a certain question first before he came to the disciples. Who do people say I am? And then he followed it later. Who do the crowd, or like in Luke he says, who do the crowd say I am? And of course, as we read the response, the reasons were so varied. But when we move on to Matthew, he then puts that question direct now to the disciples. But what about you? What do you say I am? I suppose they were all looking at each other, trying to say who can give the best answer. Having been with Jesus for so long, you don't want to be caught offside. So this initial question that Jesus put to his disciples was about the generality of the people, how they think about him. In my view, it would be normal for any human being to say, but how can a person ask me a question that he knows the answer? If I may even use myself, in a discussion with my wife, Mrs. Mirijala, she asks me, so who do people say who is your wife? Whatever answer I give, I don't know. And then she follows up and says, and you, who do you say is your wife? Would that be a safe question to answer? Let's be practical. Let's not be like we are in church, then we forget, but I'm just asking. Will that be a safe question to answer? We are not in a class, I accept. But even for women, this is tough. You are asked, who do people say who is your husband? Whatever answer, we don't know. And then the husband says, but you, who do you say is your husband? It's a difficult one, isn't it? Very challenging. It's a broad question. Someone may even say it smiling, so that you don't even feel like maybe there's something that I did. That's why they are asking. They are smiling and laughing jovial. But you'll be forced to come down and say, what is the intention of this person? And they have been married for 35 years. Some even 50 years, then ask someone, someone is asking you, so who do they say who is your husband? I don't know. I leave the answer to you. So otherwise, Jesus was not concerned with the commoners. His main concern was, do the disciples understand him? He needed them to be able to identify themselves with him. And in response, Simon said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. That's in Matthew chapter 16, verse 6. But the same verse goes a little bit further in terms of Jesus' response to that. Jesus said to Simon, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. For this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church. And the gates of hell will not overcome it. I'll give you the keys of kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you lose on earth will be loosed in heaven." We are coming closer home now. We've been struggling to identify who are these people talking. So, with that response, the key issue that Jesus wanted the disciples to be able to tell him was that we know you are the Messiah and Son of God, the very rock that the foundation of the church will be laid upon. That is what he wanted them to confirm. And by confirming that, they are now identifying them with him. Because if you are not related to someone, it may be difficult to explain who that person is. We also realize that these words were said after Jesus had fed the 4,000 multitude. This is after the 5,000. We know the 5,000 is the common one. So having traveled and teaching all over, he was expecting that the disciples now just do not know him, but they are now able to identify themselves with him. It also happens to us in some circumstances. We may be coming to church every day. I'm not talking about God and Jesus. I'm just saying, as a church Methodist, we are here every Sunday. If there is a meeting on a Wednesday evening, a worship group, we are also here. But when we go out, are we able to identify ourselves with the Methodist Church? And if we have identified ourselves with the Methodist Church, who is the founder of the Methodist Church? It's not John Wesley. I know that will be the big answer. It's Christ. As a church, the founder is Christ. Are we able to identify ourselves with Christ? And if the same question is posed to us, to say, who do you say is Jesus? Or who do you say God is? Will we have the answer? So, in an effort to make sure that his disciples understand him, they identify themselves with him, he had to seek that knowledge from them. But in seeking to understand that they understand him, ourselves, there's also something that, from this question, there is something that we need to understand so that we can also say we understand who Jesus is. Let me also say it upfront. Normally when we are taught preaching and when we are preaching, we come to that point where we say, what do we do? Let me put it upfront and say, in this sermon, I don't have that section. I will not tell you what to do. It is you to be able to ponder on that, to say, there is a question. What is my response to that question? So, in ourselves trying to understand this question, there's also a phrase that I want us to understand. If that answers what you should do after the sermon, God bless. Because me, I'm not prepared to give that answer. And I'm not prepared for it. What I'm prepared for is for you to be able to go, is for you to go and identify who Jesus is to you. The phrase that I want us to briefly understand is the one that says, I am. We have heard this, isn't it? I am. This is an important phrase in the Bible. God refers to himself as the I am. It starts in Exodus chapter 3, verse 13 to 14. When God spoke to Moses, we all know the story of the burning bush. Moses asked, what could I say is his name? And then shall I tell them what? And God said to him, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Remember where we came from? I'm saying there are people that are talking. We can hear someone conversing with someone, and there's someone who is acknowledging technically that I'm the servant, I get my power from someone. And is now asking, who do you say I am? So when we look at this phrase, I am, Jesus has also used it. Okay? And the major verses are found in John that records the I am, the I am. For example, he says, I am the bread of life. That's John 6, verse 35. I am the light of the world. John 8, verse 12. I am the door of the sheep. John 10, verse 7. I am God. I am the good shepherd. John 10, verse 11. I am the resurrection and the life. John 11, verse 25. I am the way, the truth, and the life. John 14, verse 6. I am the true vine. John 15. Verse 1. So we can see now, I've said the idea is to be able to identify this person. And it also continues into Revelation, the popular one that we always talk about, the Alpha and the Omega. He says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. So, people are talking about power, about divorce, about their relationship. And then somebody asks, who do you say I am? And I've said, the responsibility is yours. To be able to identify in your own. So, possibly when someone is asking you to say, who am I? Which means, to some extent, there are a number, let's say definitions or names ascribed to someone. So he also wants to find out to say, but you, what do you say? And we all know that people have referred Jesus to a lot of good names and bad names, depending on which side they were. But the question that then comes to you is to say, what do you say he is? So the thing has been, we want to identify this person. So we say, in terms of where we are now, if we look at Romans 10, verse 9, it says, if you proclaim with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, then you will be saved. So, which means there is a time where you need yourself to proclaim that Jesus is the Lord. We've been trying to identify. So the identification is Jesus is the Lord. But it's not a question of just saying Jesus is the Lord, it ends there. No. The Bible is saying to us, we need to be able to identify ourselves with him. It's just like in a family, there are certain names that even if you want to do something wrong, you always look back and say, if I do this and they report that so and so do this. I remember I was talking to somebody the other day. They will report, for example, in a newspaper, Gengo killed daughter. Eh? What runs into your mind? Is the president, isn't it? That's what comes into your mind. But when you read the story, you may even find that the name Gengo could be a first name. So, I'm saying we want to be able to identify that Jesus is Lord. But at the same time, we need to identify ourselves with him. There should be a relationship with him. The core principle of Christianity from other religions is that we believe God is supreme. So when we say Jesus is the Lord, we are in the same way acknowledging that he is supreme. So when we accept that he is supreme over our lives, we've identified ourselves. If we are willing to claim Jesus as a Lord and submit ourselves to him, we are invited to live with him forever. Like the example I've just given now. That means all the good deeds that he did during his life, during his teachings, during his preaching, we should be able to do the same. But of course, getting the power for him, identifying with him, and also being to say he is the Son of the living God. These are things that at times you may not find, people may talk about it, let me put it that way. But no one will say, I am now from now turning your heart to acknowledge and proclaim. That is what we aim for as preachers, as prophets, as ministers. But yourself and your heart is the core foundation of that proclamation. Like I've said already, in my plan, I have no points for you to say, this is how I'm going to answer someone if he says, who do you think Jesus is? I'm saying, I leave that responsibility to you. Make it a homework to yourself to say, the way I am living, do I know who Jesus is? The way I am living, am I identifying myself with the Son of Man? This is your responsibility. May the people of God say amen.